The secrets of the Federal Reserve. Imagine a room so quiet you can hear the ticking of a pocket watch. The men inside speak in whispers. No reporters. No cameras. No government representatives. Only bankers, the most powerful in the world, pretending to be strangers, traveling under fake names, instructed to avoid sitting together on the train. No meeting minutes. No public record. No trace. This is not the opening scene of a political thriller. It is the true origin of the most influential financial institution on earth, the Federal Reserve of the United States. Most people believe the Federal Reserve is part of the government. It isn't, not fully. Most believe it was created transparently. It wasn't. Most believe it is a simple central bank. It's far more than that. In fact, the Federal Reserve's power is so vast that a single decision inside its closed-door meetings can move global markets, collapse economies, erase national wealth, and change the direction of world history. And somehow, most people barely understand what it does. Today, we uncover the unanswered question that has haunted economists, historians, and even presidents. Why was the Federal Reserve really created, and who truly benefits? Because across more than 100 years, through booms, busts, wars, depressions, and global crises, one pattern remains. Every major economic disaster somehow ends with the Federal Reserve gaining more power. Coincidence? Or design? Welcome to World Financial Mysteries. This is The Secrets of the Federal Reserve. Money before the Fed. Before we can unravel the secrets, we must understand the world that existed before the Federal Reserve. For much of the 19th and early 20th century, the United States suffered from a problem that haunted every president, banker, and entrepreneur. The country had no central bank. And without one, the financial system was chaotic. Dangerously chaotic. Banks printed their own money. Each banknote was different. Some were trusted. Many were not. Counterfeits were everywhere. Bank failures were common. The U.S. experienced a financial crisis roughly every 8 to 10 years. 1837, complete collapse 1857, panic wipes out banks 1873, long depression begins 1893, one of the worst crashes in history 1907, the panic that nearly ended America's financial credibility. These weren't minor issues. They destroyed savings, lives, businesses, and nations. And behind almost every panic was one cause. The banking system had too much power and too little stability. But here is where the story takes an unexpected turn. Instead of losing power during these crises, the most influential bankers, especially those connected to the House of Morgan, gained more. Because when the U.S. government panicked, they had only one place to turn: the private bankers themselves. And this leads us to one of the most revealing moments in American financial history. The man who became America's central bank, J.P. Morgan. In 1907, when the U.S. banking system faced collapse, one man saved the country. Not a president. Not Congress. Not the Treasury. But J. Pierpont Morgan, the wealthiest and most powerful banker in the world. He gathered bankers in his library, locked the doors, forced them into a financial rescue plan, and single-handedly prevented economic catastrophe. For the everyday American, this was a miracle. But for the U.S. government, it was a nightmare. Because if one private individual could save the country, then one private individual also had the power to destroy it. The Panic of 1907 didn't just reveal the fragility of the U.S. financial system. It revealed who truly controlled it. The public was furious. Politicians were terrified. Something had to be done. The U.S. needed a central bank. But not everyone agreed on what that central bank should look like. And who should control it? Would it be run by the government? Or by private bankers? This is where the story turns dark. Because the answer would be decided not in Washington, but in secret. The secret meeting at Jekyll Island. It happened in November 1910. A group of men boarded a private train in New Jersey. They avoided using their full names. They didn't speak to porters. They were instructed to deny everything if questioned. Their destination? Jekyll Island, Georgia, a private island owned by the richest men in America. Who were these men? Nelson Aldrich, senator, father-in-law to a Rockefeller Paul Warburg, a German banker with deep European central banking knowledge Frank Vanderlip, president of National City Bank Henry Davison, partner of J.P. Morgan Benjamin Strong, future head of the New York Fed Charles Norton, another leading banker. Together, they represented nearly one-fourth of the world's wealth. But why travel in secrecy? Because these men were not supposed to be writing U.S. financial policy. They were supposed to be regulated by it. Yet here they were, secretly designing the foundation of America's financial future. The public could never know. If citizens learned that the most powerful bankers were creating the central bank themselves, the plan would collapse. So, this meeting was buried in secrecy. For decades, at Jekyll Island, these men drafted what would become the Aldrich Plan, the blueprint for the Federal Reserve System. But here's where the story gets stranger. Although the Aldrich Plan was written by bankers, Congress presented the final legislation, the Federal Reserve Act, as if it were a government-led solution. In reality, only minor changes were made. The core structure remained exactly as the bankers designed it. When President Woodrow Wilson signed the Federal Reserve Act in 1913, he unknowingly set into motion one of the greatest power shifts in American history. Publicly, the Federal Reserve was marketed as independent, stabilizing, scientific, trustworthy. Privately, it was a hybrid institution unlike anything else in the world. Half public, half private, entirely powerful. The question is, powerful for whom? How the Fed became the most powerful financial force on earth. The Federal Reserve's design ensured several things. Private bankers controlled the regional Federal Reserve banks. The government appeared to be in charge, but wasn't fully. The Fed could create money. The Fed could act independently from Congress. Its decisions couldn't be easily audited. It was the perfect system. Too public to be distrusted, too private to be controlled, too complex to be questioned. And then came World War I. To finance the war, the U.S. government needed money, massive amounts of it. The Federal Reserve stepped in. By purchasing government bonds, it effectively created new money. This ability would become the Fed's greatest power. After the war, something odd happened. The Federal Reserve became the single most influential institution in determining the value of money itself. Not Congress, not the Treasury, the Fed. But with great power came unintended consequences. Or were they unintended? The Fed and the Great Depression. The 1920s were a decade of boom. The stock market soared. Banks lent aggressively. Speculation went wild. But behind the scenes, the Fed was making critical decisions. Lowering interest rates, then raising them sharply, failing to support failing banks, tightening credit at the worst possible moment. By 1929, the bubble burst. What followed was catastrophic. The worst economic collapse in American history, the Great Depression. Was the Fed responsible? Many economists say yes. Even the Federal Reserve itself admitted, decades later, that its failures worsened the crisis. Milton Friedman, Nobel Prize-winning economist, famously said, "The Great Depression was caused by the failure of the Federal Reserve." But the consequences were far-reaching. When the economy collapses, most institutions lose power. The Federal Reserve gained more. The Depression led to greater reliance on monetary policy, expanded Fed influence, more emergency powers. A pattern was forming. Crisis, Federal Reserve gains power. Bigger crisis, Federal Reserve gains even more. This wasn't the last time. Secrecy, war, and the dollar's supremacy. World War II reshaped the global economy. The United States emerged as the most powerful nation. And with the Bretton Woods Agreement of 1944, the U.S. dollar became the global reserve currency. This gave the Federal Reserve unprecedented global influence. Because if the U.S. dollar was the world's money, then the Federal Reserve effectively became the world's central bank. Its decisions now affected Europe, Asia, Africa, Latin America, global trade, global debt, global development, global stability. The Fed was no longer a national institution. It was an international power. But something else happened. In 1971, President Richard Nixon ended the gold standard. The dollar was no longer backed by gold. It was backed by trust in the U.S. government and in the Federal Reserve. This decision created the modern financial system. Unlimited money creation, exploding debt levels, global reliance on U.S. monetary policy. And yet, even as the Federal Reserve's power grew, its internal operations became more secretive. The Fed's meetings were private, its discussions sealed, its decision-making process inaccessible. And once again, crisis after crisis, the Fed emerged stronger. 1987 crash, 2000 dot-com bubble, 2008 global financial crisis, 2020 pandemic crash, 2022 inflation crisis. Time. The Federal Reserve ended with more influence than when it started. Is this coincidence? Or part of the structure built in secrecy back in 1910? Failed fixes. When the Fed's solutions create new problems. The Federal Reserve was designed to stabilize the economy, prevent bank failures, smooth out business cycles, protect the value of money. Yet the opposite happens again and again. Here are the patterns economists cannot ignore. 1. Lowering interest rates creates asset bubbles. Stocks, housing, crypto, prices inflate artificially. 2. Raising interest rates pressures banks and households, leading to recessions and banking crises. 3. Quantitative easing expands wealth inequality. Asset owners get richer. Wage earners fall behind. 4. Endless money creation devalues the dollar. Prices rise. Savings lose purchasing power. 5. Financial markets become addicted to Fed intervention. Every downturn expects a bailout. The Fed's actions may prevent immediate catastrophe, but they build up larger long-term risks. Risks that require even more Federal Reserve power to manage. This is the cycle. Fed action, stability, new bubble, crashed, more Fed power. A perpetual feedback loops. Not because of malice or intention, but because of the structure. The institution created to fix financial instability depends on financial instability to justify its power. Modern parallels, the shocking data. Let's examine today's financial landscape. The Federal Reserve controls the price of money. This means it controls mortgages, credit cards, student loans, business loans, government debt, banking, liquidity, corporate growth, consumer spending, retirement savings, global markets. And the data shows something alarming. Fact 1. 80% of all U.S. dollars in existence were created since 2008. That is unprecedented in history. Fact 2. The top 1% now controls more wealth than the entire middle class. This divergence accelerated dramatically after Federal Reserve interventions. Fact 3. Every economic crisis magnifies the Fed's power. After 2008, the Fed's balance sheet exploded from $900 billion to $4.5 trillion. After 2020, it surged past $8 trillion. This money creation did not reduce inequality, it increased it. Fact 4. Global markets react instantly to Federal Reserve comments, not government policy. One sentence from the Fed chair can move the S&P 500, oil prices, gold, crypto, currencies, bond markets. It is the closest thing the modern world has to a financial steering wheel. Fact 5. The Federal Reserve has never gone through a full independent audit. Despite repeated political pressure, the full operations of the Federal Reserve remain opaque. Not illegal, just inaccessible. And yet, the biggest mystery remains. Is the Federal Reserve guided more by economic science, or by the interests of those who benefit from its power? Because the people who sit on the boards of regional Federal Reserve banks still include private bankers. The structure created in 1913 has barely changed. The question is, how much influence does private banking still have over public monetary policy? No one truly knows. And perhaps that's the point. 3 takeaways. Takeaway 1. The Federal Reserve was born in secrecy. The Jekyll Island meeting shows that the most powerful private bankers shaped the foundation of the U.S. monetary system. Takeaway 2. Crises expand the Fed's power. Every major financial disaster has increased Federal Reserve influence, transforming it from a national institution into a global authority. Takeaway 3. The modern financial system is built on trust, not backing. With the end of the gold standard, the Federal Reserve controls the value of money itself, affecting billions worldwide. A warning: the next crisis will test everything. The system built over the past century is stretched. Record debt, global instability, rising interest rates, fragile banks, geopolitical shocks. At some point, another crisis is inevitable. And when it comes, one institution will once again decide the outcome: the Federal Reserve. The question is not whether the Fed will act, but what power it will gain next. If you want to understand the forces shaping your wealth, your economy, and your future, if you want to uncover hidden histories and financial secrets the world rarely explains, then continue this journey with us. Like this video, subscribe to World Financial Mysteries, and join us as we decode the system running the world behind the scenes.